Hi, it's Wednesday, April 2nd. This is Rick, and I want to talk about something today, a little bit of inside baseball, maybe, but it's really going to affect the TV coverage that you see moving forward. It's going to have an impact, even though it might not be super obvious to you. So I think it's important. The Television Critics Association, the TCA, sent out an email to members earlier today saying, look, we're not going to do our July, August tour like we usually do. They typically do two tours a year, early in the year, January, February, then one July, Augusty. And this is a chance where the networks come in, they bring in their cast, all the different directors, producers. They do some panels in front of critics. Critics get to do some one-on-one interviews, interact with them at parties, and it's been a big deal for more than 30 years. Now, the industry's changed a lot since then, right? 30 years ago, TV critics were basically you worked at a big magazine or you worked for a newspaper. I mean, back then, every even medium-sized newspaper had a full-time TV critic. Now all those jobs are gone. I mean, I live in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We have two newspapers here. One of them, the Star Tribune, is one of the more successful newspapers in the country, one of the most profitable. And they don't have a full-time TV critic. They haven't for a few years. They have someone now who sort of does some TV writing. He also does some pop culture, but it's almost always targeted with some Minnesota-centric angle to it. You know, this idea of writing sort of national pieces just doesn't exist anymore. So that the entire level of TV critics is gone. And, I don't know, maybe a dozen years ago, I wrote this piece arguing, does the TCA matter anymore? And my basic premise was, look, the industry's changing. The the way that TV critics are employed is changing. You know, there are digital outlets that are now national. There's a lot more contract people, a lot more freelance people. There's a lot less expertise overall when you get down among below the top level critics. So the TCA needs to figure out a way to adjust that, right? To make it valuable for the networks, but also for the TV critics too. How can we figure this out? And honestly, the reaction was not positive from TCA members. The crap storm of comments I got from people at the time was fairly immense. A lot of stuff along the lines of, "Oh, you're just jealous, or you don't understand what the TCA does, or blah blah blah." You know, there was a lot of that stuff. But I think looking back, I wasn't wrong about a lot of it. Because we're at this point now where the TCA's canceled their both tours for this year, both gatherings. I, which makes me think probably it's never going to happen again, or not anytime soon. And so then, how do all these people who don't live in New York and LA, how do they connect with interviews? How do they do stuff? Now, I mean, from the network's perspective, from the streamer's perspective, a lot of them don't really think that TV critics matter that much, right? They're more than happy because, even the trades, there's a lot less industry coverage, a lot less reviews than there used to be. There's a lot more stories of, hey, this actor said this thing in this podcast, or, oh, look, here's some casting info from a press release. I mean, there's a lot less actual reporting. So because of all that, they just feel that there's less of a need to bring critics in, to spend the money, the hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring these people in, particularly since a larger number of critics are now freelance contract. Even if they're living somewhere else in the country, they're writing for an outlet that's national. And even more so, they don't get to write about what they want to write about, right? If you're a freelance critic, if you're working contract somebody, you're writing what the editor wants you to write, which tends to be sort of mushy, clicky stories, right? I mean, I know at the last TC, I would speak with people who were freelancing for outlets. Outlets would fly them in for 3 or 4 specific days, and the editors would say to them, "You need to speak to this person, ask them this question because." That question is going to be the hook for a story. And they would have this list of questions they had to ask. Super helpful, the outlets. Honestly, from the network standpoint, I don't know. I don't know how useful that is. This is like one of those things where it really isn't working for either side right now. But the idea of connecting people who are critics who don't have juice, right? I mean, take for me instance. Now, granted, I'm a bit of a unicorn. I'm living in the Midwest. I write full time. I've got my own business. I do this full time. This is my job. And there aren't many critics who can talk about doing that, right? This is a very unicorny kind of approach. I understand that. But one advantage I did have of going to the TCA is I could at least get interviews with some people that I couldn't get interviews with otherwise, or at least sit down across a table from them and talk to them and get a little bit better idea. I like to have conversations, and doing it in person is really helpful. So moving forward, I don't know how that's going to shake out for me. I'm going to write about this more in the newsletter today. I mean, I will say that I've sort of been considering this might happen. You'll see that I've sort of changed the mix of stories that I'm doing, trying to find some niches for myself. During the strike, I took a very specific point of view about covering the strike, trying to do things a little differently. I write a lot about industry stuff, a lot about streaming and UI and that kind of stuff that isn't in the trades, covering a lot of global international TV, which once again isn't in the trade. Smaller domestic TV shows, trying to find those niches, right? Because that's number one, that's the kind of stuff that breaks through because no one else is writing it. And also, honestly, that's the kind of people who will talk to me, right? If I want to do a White Lotus interview, HBO is going to tell me to go get stuffed, right? Well, they won't say that specifically, but they'll be thinking it. And it's much easier for me to get an interview with a smaller show. So I honestly, I don't really have any big point to bring across in this thing. I'm not quite sure how this is all going to shake out. This is one of those things I worry about every day, right? How can I get access? How can I write about things that matter to people that are or they're very specific, that are very different, differentiating myself. I mean, I will just sort of wrap this up by saying um, you should always support independent media. This is another reason to do that. You are going to get more and more sort of well-written pablum from a lot of the big outlets because that's the most cost-efficient thing to do. If you're looking for someone who's pushing against the conventional wisdom, something that's a little contrarian, a point of view that you wouldn't have heard that will sort of make you think, I don't know if I agree with that, but wow, that's really interesting. You should support independent media, including, honestly, me. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to write about this more in the newsletter. I'm going to spend some time trying to organize my thoughts a little bit more. But this is a big deal. Like I said, I don't know that it's going to be on the radar for most people who follow TV, who aren't in the industry, but it's a big deal. It's kind of a sad moment, honestly. This is another one of those ways that Hollywood's changing, and I'm not sure it's necessarily for the better, but I think it probably has to happen. And we're gonna see. We're gonna see what happens. I'm gonna miss seeing you all guys. I'm gonna have to try and figure out some ways to organize some little mini trips to California, and maybe this will give me the opportunity to do a couple of those big conferences in Europe, which I'd really like to do. The TV series one that just wrapped up. It's the kind of thing where I think it'd be really helpful for me. I just have to kind of figure out how to do it, and we'll see. But thanks for sticking with me, and I will see you in tonight's newsletter.